Sunday dinners at the Harrington estate always felt more like stage productions than family gatherings. The chandeliers sparkled a little too brightly, the laughter was a little too forced, and every compliment came wrapped in condescension. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, twirling a forkful of salmon, letting the clinking of wine glasses and corporate chatter fade into the background. Across from me, my brother Andrew adjusted his cufflinks, a smug smile tugging at his lips. "Final signatures go through next week," he said, flashing his Rolex like it was a family crest. "Dad can finally retire in peace." My father Richard raised his glass with pride, toasting the future of Harrington Freight Co. Meanwhile, my stepmother Judith reached for the asparagus and asked, "And how's your little digital project going, Claire?" I smiled into my wine, biting back the truth. They saw a project. What they didn't know was that the deal they were celebrating, this grand transition of power, was already done. And I wasn't the one being pushed out. I was the one pulling the strings. I glanced at my phone as a message lit up, "Merger finalized." They're rattled. They didn't realize it yet, but the future they were toasting, it belonged to me. I used to think one day they'd see me, not just look across the table and ask polite questions about that website thing, but really see what I've built. It's strange how silence becomes armor. You wear it so long, it starts to feel like part of your skin. By the time I launched Nexacore at 25, I already knew I'd be building from the shadows. My father believed in physical things, steel wheels, warehouses, business that smelled like oil and old money, digital. That wasn't real to him. Data didn't move freight, and algorithms didn't sign checks. He used to tell me, "Claire, people need to see what you do to trust it." I disagreed. People trust what works, whether they see it or not, and Nexacore. It worked. From a rented one-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill, I built infrastructure that now supports over a dozen state agencies, dozens of Fortune 500 backends, and defense-grade cybersecurity. My father had no idea that what he dismissed as a blog-powered systems, more complex than anything Harrington Freight ever touched. Andrew had laughed the day I mentioned expanding into automation. "You can't replace people with code," he said, sipping bourbon like it was wisdom. But he never saw the numbers. He never saw the contracts quietly shifting from his desk to mine. He certainly didn't know about Iron Peak, the startup they thought they were acquiring to eliminate competition. Iron Peak was born on my dining table, a decoy with just enough teeth to scare their board, redirect their vendors, and bleed them slow. Tonight I sat through another round of patronizing concern, Judith asking if I was seeing anyone, Dad suggesting I talk to Andrew about real opportunities, and Andrew grinning like a man already writing my career obituary. I wanted to laugh. Amanda, my second in command and a former Bain consultant, had just confirmed the Iron Peak acquisition was a formality now. Nexacore held controlling shares. We were the real buyers, not them. And tomorrow, when the boardroom screens lit up, they'd see exactly who they'd been outmaneuvered by. But tonight, I just nodded and played the role. Claire, the single daughter with a rented apartment and a dream. Let them keep their assumptions a little longer. The game wasn't over yet. Not until I walked through those glass doors. My phone buzzed again. Amanda Market reacting. Harrington Freight stock dipping after leak. I felt the shift in the room, almost imperceptible, as my father's expression tensed for just a second. Maybe he felt it too. Maybe he sensed the world he'd built tilting beneath his feet, but he didn't know the half of it. Not yet. I swirled the wine in my glass, looked across the table at Andrew, still smug, still blind, and I realized with a quiet certainty this wasn't just a business play. It was a reckoning, and it was already in motion. I drove home in silence, the kind of silence that hums with electricity. My Tesla cut through the night like a whisper, gliding past rows of dark windows and sleeping city blocks. Seattle always had a quiet strength to it, its misty streets, its quiet ambition. I used to walk these same streets with a laptop bag full of ideas no one believed in. Back when I couldn't afford groceries and spent nights debugging code instead of sleeping. Now I pass my old apartment without stopping. I didn't need to. My brownstone fully restored and bought in cash waited for me. It wasn't just home, it was headquarters. Inside the space pulsed with life. 12 monitors lit the walls of my study, each flickering with real-time market data, internal comms, global server analytics. This wasn't a guest room anymore. This was the brain of an empire. Nexacore didn't just survive, it scaled. We weren't just a tech startup. We were the silent backbone of digital transformation in 3 continents. And tomorrow, the Harrington family would learn just how far I'd gone without them. I poured a glass of whiskey, one of the few habits I picked up from Dad, and sat down at my desk. My fingers flew across the keyboard, running the final diagnostics on the acquisition rollout. Amanda had sent me updated projections. With Iron Peak absorbed and our shell structures dismantled, we were ready to go fully transparent by morning. There'd be no walking it back. The moment they connected the dots, it would be too late. My father still saw business as a handshake in a boardroom. Andrew still thought titles meant power. They never grasped what I tried to tell them years ago, that data was the new currency, that the future wouldn't be built on steel and shipping containers, but on code speed and precision. They had laughed then, and tomorrow those same laughs would die in their throats. But as I stared at the glowing screens, I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. I felt steady, like a tide rolling in. This wasn't revenge. It was evolution. They could have joined me. Years ago, they could have listened. Instead, they clung to tradition, like a life raft while the water kept rising. My phone buzzed again. Amanda Leak confirmed. Iron Peak is trending. Board calling emergency meeting at 9 a.m. I smiled faintly. It was happening. I walked to the tall windows and looked out at the skyline. Somewhere across the city, my father was probably pouring another drink, trying to make sense of the numbers. Andrew was likely digging through documents, too late to stop the inevitable. I pressed my palm to the cool glass. For the first time, they were going to see me. Not as Claire, the hobbyist, the dropout from the family mold, but as Claire Harrington, CEO of the company that just bought theirs, and they wouldn't even see it coming until I walked through those doors. The next morning came fast. I barely slept, not because of nerves, but because every system had to be airtight. By the time the city began to wake, Nexacore was already 2 hours ahead, our global teams syncing across time zones, verifying asset transitions, server security, and legal protocols. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the lapel of my navy blazer. It was sharp, precise, tailored with quiet authority. No oversized hoodie today. No one would mistake me for the girl with a blog when I walked into that boardroom. I looked myself in the eye, calm, focused, ready. The car ride to Harrington Freight's headquarters felt surreal. The building loomed like a relic of another era, steel stone glass, polished to perfection, but outdated in every way that mattered. Same gold-lettered sign, same valet, same lobby with the smell of leather chairs and old ambition. A security guard nodded politely as I stepped inside. He didn't recognize me. I was fine with that. I didn't need recognition. I needed results. Amanda was already waiting by the private elevator, tablet in hand, as poised as ever. "They don't know yet," she said, eyes locked on mine. "But they're spooked. The board's in early. Your father's pacing. Andrew's been calling legal all morning." I gave a small nod, the tension humming beneath my skin. "Do they suspect it's us?" Amanda shook her head. They think it's Iron Peak going rogue. They haven't traced anything back to Nexicor. Good, I said, stepping into the elevator. Let's keep it that way, until the door opens. The ride-up was silent. Amanda double-checked her notes. I reviewed my own talking points, but really, it was all muscle memory at this point. 2 years of careful moves, every contract, every shadow company, every pivot, designed to lead to this moment. As the elevator doors slid open, I stepped into the executive floor with a sense of finality. Through the glass walls, I could see them, my father pacing Andrew, flipping through spreadsheets with furrowed brows, the board whispering in tight circles. Something inside me settled. I wasn't walking into a war. I was walking into a reveal. Amanda touched my elbow, soft but firm. You ready? I took a breath. I've been ready since the day they laughed me out of that meeting 5 years ago. The glass door swung open. The room fell still. Conversations died mid-sentence. My father stopped pacing. Andrew looked up, startled. Claire, he said slowly, what are you doing here? This meeting is confidential. I met his gaze, let a faint smile play at my lips. Is it? Amanda stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. Allow me to introduce Claire Harrington, CEO of Nexicor Systems. Silence hit the room like a wave. Eyes widened, jaws clenched, and before anyone could speak, I walked to the head of the table, the seat they never once offered me. Not until today. I sat down slowly at the head of the table, not to provoke them, but to claim what had always been mine to lead. The air was thick. No one moved. No one spoke. My father's face was pale, like someone had cut the power to the world he thought he controlled. Andrew just stared, blinking rapidly, as if trying to recalculate everything he thought he knew. For a long moment, I let the silence speak. Let them sit in the discomfort of it, the weight of realizing that the person they had dismissed for years now held their future in her hands. My father finally found his voice, though it was thinner than I'd ever heard it. Nexicor. What do you mean you run? Nexicor. Amanda didn't miss a beat. Claire Harrington is the founder and CEO. Nexicor finalized the acquisition of Harrington Freight this morning. Andrew looked down at the documents in front of him, slowly turning pages as if the words might suddenly rearrange themselves. But Iron Peak. They bought Iron Peak. I cut in calmly. Was a shell company we created. Its only purpose was to destabilize your market share, reroute your vendors, and make this acquisition both strategic and affordable. My father gripped the back of his chair, his knuckles white. You sabotaged us. I met his eyes steady. No, I outmaneuvered you. Everything I proposed years ago, automation, cloud infrastructure, supply chain analytics, you said it was noise. You said I didn't understand the real world, so I built one of my own. The screens behind me flickered to life, displaying Nexicor's global footprint operations in 28 countries, over 6,000 employees, clients, spanning Fortune 500's government agencies and private tech firms. Our projected annual revenue made Harrington Freight look like a rounding error. Andrew's voice cracked. So you did all this behind our backs. Not behind your backs, I said softly. In plain sight. You just weren't looking. One of the board members, a man named Gerard, who'd barely acknowledged me at family events, leaned forward. What happens now? I glanced at Amanda, who handed over the updated merger terms. You can stay on, I said, directing the offer to the room. Adapt, learn. Help bring this company into the future. Or you can walk away with your payout. It's your choice. My father looked down at the papers, hands trembling slightly. Claire, why didn't you tell us? My voice was quiet but resolute. Because you never listened. The tension in the room shifted. No longer disbelief, just realization. the kind that settles in slowly like dusk. Then Amanda stepped beside me with a tablet in hand, her voice low but firm. You should see this. Nexacor stock just surged 9% after news of the acquisition hit TechWire. The media's calling it the merger of the year. I looked at the screen and felt a flicker of something deep in my chest, not pride, not yet, but something close. They were finally seeing the world I built, and it was only the beginning. The next hour passed in a blur of signatures, legal jargon, and stiff handshakes. The board, once filled with men who barely looked me in the eye during holidays, now leaned in attentive deferential. They asked questions, real ones, not about my love life or my blog or whether I ever considered getting a real job, but about digital infrastructure compliance regulations, international markets. For the first time, they saw me as a leader, not a novelty, not a daughter, but the architect of their company's future. Andrew sat in stunned silence, staring down at the polished walnut table. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. Nexacor had outperformed, outmaneuvered, and now outranked everything Harrington Freight had built. When the last form was signed, my father stood up and approached me. The man who once told me business was about grit and handshakes now looked like someone realizing just how far grit alone could take you in a digital world. Claire, he said, his voice low, almost hesitant, you really built all of this. I nodded. Every piece. Why didn't you ever tell us? I met his gaze for a long moment. Because you never wanted to hear it. Every time I brought something new to the table, it was dismissed. I stopped trying to convince you and started building without you. He looked away, jaw tight, but said nothing more. Judith, my stepmother, broke the awkward silence with a trembling voice. We just didn't understand. I nodded again. I know, but that doesn't mean it wasn't real. Amanda passed me a new tablet with live figures. Nexacor's post-acquisition valuation had jumped another 4.3% since the start of the meeting. The digital press was already calling it a generational shift in leadership old industry, giving way to the digital empire next door. I stood letting my gaze sweep across the room one last time. This isn't the end for Harrington Freight, I said. It's a second life. If you're willing to evolve, you'll find there's a place for you, but it won't be the same. Nothing will. Andrew finally looked up. His voice was smaller now, unsure. And what about me? That depends, I said honestly. You can stay, but not as the heir, not as the decision maker. You'll have to earn your place just like everyone else. He looked like he wanted to argue, but no words came. Maybe for the first time he was realizing that power wasn't inherited, it was built. Amanda leaned in, whispering, investor lines are lighting up. Requests for interviews. Media wants a statement. I turned back to the board, still reeling from the shift they never saw coming. Let's get to work, I said. We have an outdated logistics company to bring into the 21st century. And as I stepped out of that room, I could feel the tide changing for them, for me, and for the name Harrington itself. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. That night, I returned not to my brownstone in Seattle, but to Nexacor's penthouse headquarters in Manhattan. The city was alive outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, pulsing with light and movement like a giant circuit board. My office overlooked the skyline, the kind of view people dream about. But I didn't stop to admire it. I dropped my bag by the desk, kicked off my heels, and stood barefoot on the cool stone floor, letting the weight of the day settle into my bones. It wasn't just a win, it was a shift tectonic and irreversible. And yet part of me still felt the ache of what it had taken to get here. I thought of every Sunday dinner where my ideas were treated like noise, every email I sent that went unanswered, every pitch shot down without a second glance. I thought of the nights I stayed up until dawn, coding infrastructure, while my family assumed I was playing around on social media. All those years, they thought I was wasting time. I was building something they couldn't even imagine. My phone buzzed on the desk, a message from my mother. "We had no idea. I'm so proud of you." And another from Judith, surprisingly soft. "Claire, can we talk? I want to understand now." I stared at the screen for a long time, my throat tightening slightly. Not with regret, but with the slow arrival of something like peace. Then came the one I hadn't expected, my father. "You were right about everything." Simple, no punctuation. But I felt the weight behind it. Not an apology, not yet, but a crack in the armor, a start. I sat down in front of the wall of monitors, each one alive with motion server logs, contract approvals, investor feeds, media coverage. Nexacore wasn't just thriving, it was leading. And yet what I felt most wasn't pride or vengeance. It was clarity. I hadn't done this to prove them wrong. I had done it to build something right, something that could stand even when the old ways collapsed, something that could survive scale and reshape the rules. Across the room, Amanda appeared in the doorway, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "Today one," she said, handing me one. Of what I asked. She raised a brow. "Of the new era." I smiled, clinked her glass, and took a sip. She handed me a printed summary of post-merger coverage. The last headline on the page read, "Claire Harrington, the woman who quietly rebuilt an empire." I traced the words with my finger, then looked out the window again. Tomorrow I'd meet with key department heads. I'd announce a full restructure. We would modernize every inch of Harrington Freight. We'd tear down what didn't work and rebuild from the foundation up. But tonight, I allowed myself one deep breath, because finally they had stopped laughing, and tomorrow they'd start following. The next few weeks moved fast, but every moment felt intentional. The restructuring plan went into effect by the second Monday after the merger. I met with every department, logistics operations, finance, IT, and held one-on-one sessions with division heads who had spent decades doing things the same way. Some of them looked at me with skepticism, others with quiet fear. But none of them could deny what was happening. The data was irrefutable. Efficiency metrics climbed, outdated contracts were replaced, and for the first time in years, Harrington Freight, now rebranded as Nexa Freight, wasn't playing catch-up. We were leading. Andrew kept his position and title, only reporting directly to a transition officer from Nexacore. He didn't speak much in meetings, but he showed up, listened, took notes. Slowly, he stopped trying to prove himself and started asking the right questions. I saw something shift in him. Not admiration exactly, but respect. It was a start. My father, though, kept his distance. He no longer attended board meetings, but I heard from Amanda that he visited the building late at night, walking the halls, talking to old managers, trying to understand where everything had changed. I hadn't spoken to him since that morning in the boardroom. I didn't need to. There were things we both needed to sit with in silence. One night, as I walked past one of the newly updated data hubs, once the company's dusty storage area, I paused and looked through the glass wall. Inside, a new server room buzzed with light and motion, its racks humming like a living organism. I remembered pitching this exact upgrade 4 years ago. My proposal had been printed, laughed at, and tossed aside. Too expensive. Unnecessary, they said. But now it stood here, real and operational. Not because they approved it, but because I built a company that didn't need their approval. And yet, standing there in the quiet, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something else, something harder to name. Grief maybe not for the company we changed, but for the years lost trying to earn recognition from people who never planned to give it. I realized then that the hardest part of building in silence isn't the work, it's the loneliness. I leaned against the glass, watching the soft pulsing of the machines, and thought about how far I'd come from that tiny apartment with borrowed furniture and a vision no one else could see. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a message from Andrew family dinner this Sunday. Dad wants to come. You should too. I stared at the screen, a knot forming in my chest. Not anger, not hesitation, just the complicated pull of history. I hadn't sat at that table since the night it all changed, and now they were asking me to return, not to prove anything, just to be there. I locked my phone and turned back to the servers, their light casting long reflections on the polished floor. Maybe it was time. Maybe some cycles only end when you choose to begin a new one. Sunday came, and for the first time in years, I walked through the Harrington estate, not as the underestimated daughter, but as a woman who had rebuilt a legacy, one line of code, one sleepless night, one impossible decision at a time. The dining room looked the same, but the air had changed. My father stood as I entered, not to challenge me, but to pull out my chair. Andrew offered a quiet smile. No smugness, just understanding. We talked, really talked. No lectures, no sideways jabs, just stories, updates, even laughter. The silence that had once been a wall was now a bridge. I realized then that victory didn't come with noise. It came with clarity, in forgiveness, in growth, in choosing to return not to the past, but to the people who could still grow with you. Sometimes betrayal builds you. Sometimes loyalty blinds you. But when you're brave enough to keep building, even through heartbreak, what rises can be stronger than what fell. The lesson: don't shrink to fit what others expect of you. Build anyway, dream louder, heal privately, and when you rise, do it with grace. If you've ever been underestimated, share your journey in the comments. And if this story moved you, subscribe. Your voice matters here.